My name is Hani Bushra. I'm an immigration attorney in Huntington Beach, California, and I specialize in immigration. And this is a video about citizenship exam exemptions and how to obtain an exemption for your citizenship exam. This video is not about how to apply for citizenship and what are the requirements to apply for citizenship. For that, you can check our previous video in our archives discussing how to apply for citizenship. Now, I just want to be clear about what is the citizenship exam and what it's composed of, and then we can talk about how we can be exempt from that exam. The citizenship exam is composed of two formal parts. There is a civics exam and there is an English exam. The civics exam specifically deals with 100 questions that are given to you by the USCIS for you to study, and out of those 100 questions, you're going to be asked 10 questions. The 10 questions are selected randomly. So they come out, the officer does not pick which questions to ask you, but he's given a list of 10 questions to be asked randomly. The questions are usually asked orally, so that the officer would ask you the question and you would answer them. Sometimes they are written on the screen and you have to answer them. Now, you don't need to pass all 10 questions. You only need to pass 6 out of the 10 questions. Okay? The second exam is the English exam, and out of that exam there's two components. The first component is the reading part, and the second component is the writing part. The reading part, usually there's a tablet screen in front of you as you're sitting in the exam room, in the application room. And in that tablet screen, you're going to read a sentence. So one of the sentences that you read is, "Where is the White House?" Okay, so you read that sentence out loud to the officer. The officer is satisfied. He will ask you to write a sentence in response. And the sentence in response is, "The White House is in Washington, D.C." You're going to be writing that sentence on the tablet. And sometimes the tablet itself is not the best place to write. And sometimes you could request a piece of paper to write your answer on. Now, the words that are involved in the English exam, whether it's in the reading part or in the writing part, are usually given to you by USCIS in their study booklet, and you can study those words. Those are the two formal parts of the exam. There is a third informal part. I consider it a third exam that's going on, which is comprehension, understanding the process of what's going on, understanding the questions that are being asked. And this has been being used lately a lot in immigration processes and in USCIS interviews for naturalization. Now, this part deals specifically with, are you able to understand the questions in your application? So for example, the application has a question, have you ever practiced polygamy? Polygamy is the multiple marriages. So they can ask you a question, "Sir, do you understand what polygamy is? Can you explain to me what polygamy is?" Another question is, and this is a very famous question, have you ever had a nobility title? And so the officer will ask you, "Sir, do you understand what nobility means? Can you give me an example of nobility?" Although this is not a formal exam, it's been used lately to disqualify a lot of people from being approved for their citizenship by claiming that they're not understanding the questions. Now, the problem with that is that sometimes what affects the person in not understanding or comprehending the officer are things not related to whether the person can speak English or not. He could be nervous, they could be upset or worried about the exam. The officer could have a very heavy accent that could end up with him not understanding the person who's receiving the questions, not understanding what's the question exactly. Now, are there ways to get exemptions from the exam? Yes, there are two main exemptions. The first exemption specifically is time-related exemption, okay, and it deals with age and time. The first exemption deals with the English exam, and that exemption is called the 50-20 rule and the 55-15 rule. That rule specifically says that if you have been a resident, a green card holder in the United States at the time of filing your naturalization application for 20 years and you're 50 years or older, you are exempt from taking the English exam and can take the interview in your native language. If you are 55 years old, you have to be only 15 years resident in the United States. That's why it's 50 years and 20 years of green card, and then 55 years old, and then 15 years of green card. Okay? Now, you'll be allowed to have an interpreter with you who can interpret for you in your native language, and you'll be allowed to take the civics test in your native language. So you still have to take your civics test. The other exemption that you can get is if you are 65 years old and have been a resident for 20 plus years, you're allowed to take a different kind of civics exam, a modified exam. So instead of studying 100 questions, you're going to be only asked to study 20 questions. And so it should be easier. So you're not only going to be taking them in your native language, but you're also going to be taking them in a modified way, and it will be a much easier exam to take. Now, if you don't qualify for any of those age-related exemptions or green card-related exemptions, there is a medical disability exemption. And that medical disability has to be certified by an MD, a doctor, a DO, which is also a different kind of a doctor, or a clinical psychologist. It cannot be certified by, for instance, a speech therapist. Let's say you have a speech impediment. It cannot be it cannot be certified by an optometrist, for instance, who says you're blind. Okay, it has to be, or a social worker. It has to be somebody who is an MD or a DO or a clinical psychologist. And the disability exemption deals with more than mental faculties, because this is such a misnomer that we're hearing out there, that you have to have a mental faculty issue. You have to have some kind of inability to understand things mentally. It could be a physical ailment. It could be that you have cancer and you cannot, sit and study. It can be something related to an accident that you had young that has affected your ability to concentrate and understand things. So it doesn't have to be a mental issue. It can be a physical issue that is well documented and causes you to have a disability. Now, your doctor, whoever is going to fill it, can be your personal doctor or can be a doctor that you go and ask them to fill such a form. They have to fill a form called the N648 form. The N648 form has to be filled. So a lot of people that I see applying for medical disability, what they end up doing is they end up getting a letter from the doctor that says, oh, this person and so has medical disability, please excuse him from the exam. That would not work. The doctor needs to fill their own the application for you. Now, what are the issues that we have with the N648? We have many issues that happen inside the interviews with the N648, but I'm going to highlight the main ones. Number one issue with the N648 application is there is usually a question about who filled the application. Was it your regular treating doctor or was it a different doctor? And if you had went to a different doctor, why did you go to a different doctor? And this is where we get into a discussion and sometimes into an arguments with the officers. Okay. Now, you have to understand that for USCIS, and they published that, they consider the N648 as a form that could be easily forged, meaning that it's a document that has a lot of fraud involved. And so what happens is that this attitude is sometimes brought in by the officers into the interview and they start fighting with you about the form. Okay? And it's very important to have a competent attorney at that point who is able to answer their questions and to be able to respond to their issues about the form. So you can have a doctor from outside who is not your regular treating doctor, and you have to fill that form, and you have to explain why. For example, there are a lot of regular treating doctors who refuse to fill such forms because they don't want the headache. Okay, they don't want the extra work of filling such a form. They don't provide such services, and that's why you sought the help of a different doctor. Now, your doctor does not have to be, or the doctor filling the form does not have to be certified by USCIS. As long as they are an MD, a DO, or somebody who is a clinical psychologist, they can go ahead and fill that form. Now, the other problem we have with the N648 is that it's sometimes not filled correctly. And it's there where the officers say, got you, and they end up rejecting that form. For example, there's a question in the form that talks about the relationship between you and the doctor. How was it established? How many times have you guys met? A lot of doctors don't fill that correctly. There's a question about what kind of diagnosis you have, what kind of issues do you have, and what kind of codes those issues have. A lot of doctors would write, for instance, Alzheimer, but they would not write the code, the medical code for Alzheimer, okay? And they miss something like that. Sometimes doctors confuse the difference between the effect of a condition with explaining what the condition is. So there is a question on the form that specifically asks, what is this condition? What is Alzheimer? Define Alzheimer for me, okay? And doctors instead talk about how the Alzheimer is affecting you personally. And that's the incorrect response to the question. Sometimes the doctors don't explain in details, okay, what's the effect of the conditions on your learning a new language, whether it's taking the oath and stuff like that. They don't detail the explanation. The officers cannot question you about everything in that form. They have certain limits, and that's why it's very important to have a lawyer with you who understands these forms and is able to stop the officer when they cross that limit. The other thing that you have to understand is that if you are working with a lawyer, it's advisable that the lawyer looks at the form before it's mailed out, the N648. And that is specifically to see if the questions have been answered correctly and to avoid any problems in the interview later on. Now, before I end this video, I want to specifically address a difference between disability and accommodations. You can request a disability exemption, meaning saying that I am not able to learn English, I'm not able to take the civics test, I have a medical disability that affects me from doing that. But you can also request an accommodation. Let's say you are somebody who is hard of hearing and you are good in English, you're good at memorizing things, but you cannot hear the questions. You can request an accommodation. The accommodation could be, for instance, that instead of having the question being read to you, you can request it that it's written and you answer things in writing. To be able to judge whether you have a disability or whether you need an accommodation would be something between you and your doctor. You can consult an attorney who can tell you about what applicable laws are there to help you in such a case, but it's something that's between you and your doctor. I hope that with this video I was able to answer your questions regarding medical exemptions and what kind of exemptions we can have for your exam, for your citizenship exam. Please follow us. We go ahead and we post videos periodically about immigration and try to answer questions. If you have any questions, please leave them in your comments and we'll try our best to answer them. Thank you and have a wonderful day.